Welcome to another episode of This Week in Indies. We're excited you're here. This week, we explore the elements of a story. What do authors use that cause a story to excel over others? Are there specific pieces that need more attention than others? We discuss these curiosities and more as we sit down at the round table with a group of creatives. Then mid-show, we get our weekly dose of the Indie Connection as C.L. Cannon feeds us some misunderstood indie outcasts with books akin to Gilded by Marissa Meyer. For the final 5, we blast off into the Cassidyverse with publisher, editor, and author Adam Gaffen as he brings us another exclusive first look into his next book, The Heart of Space. So sit back and grab a cup of coffee. Get ready for a good time. Here's your host for today's episode, Madilynn Dale. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another fantastic episode with a great group of creatives. I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I get tongue-tied today. It's been a busy weekend of garage selling for me, and my husband's holding down the fort as we speak. But the best thing about garage sales is you can also stick your books out there and have people meet the author. Speaking of which, we've got a great topic for you guys today. And I want to mention, too, if you have questions about any particular element that you come across in a story or how we utilize that element in our stories, drop it in the comment. Also, if you're watching from Facebook, send a star to let our host and producers know how much you appreciate what they do here at Go Indie Now. Every time you contribute, you get entered into our season prize package drawing with a gift, with gift cards, swag, and more. But enough about me. I'm Madilynn Dale, the chapter goddess. You can check out my work on my website. Let me bring in our beautiful guests this morning, all of them, and their amazing faces. So, guys, how is it this morning where you are?
Well, it was fine this morning a few hours ago. Where I am. It's no longer morning.
Yeah,
It hasn't been for 5 hours.
Yeah, rainy and gloomy here. So.
Oh. Well, we're going to go around. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself. We're going to start right here on this side. Okay, thumbs, fingers. We're going to start with Adam.
We're going to start with Adam's fingers. Okay, go. Okay.
Everybody needs more coffee. Okay, so my name's Adam Gaffen. I am a near-future hope punk science fiction writer, and I have the next book in the Cassidyverse coming out next month. It's going to be The Heart of Space, and it's going to be another collection of short fiction. As always, thrilled to be back on This Week in Indies and looking forward to today's topic and talking with all these wonderful people.
Yes. Mr. Green.
Hello, I'm David Green. I may or may not have written this little book called Lord of the Rings. You may have heard of it. That's me.
Yes.
Okay, I'm A.F. Stewart, Anita Stewart. I write books like this, horror and fantasy and little poetry on the side. I host 2 shows, Between the Pages Book Chat, which is currently interviewing authors from the Crystal Lake Publishing, and Words That Kill for the Go Indie Now Network. And I also have 3 stores on Zazzle where I sell writer merchandise, sci-fi, fantasy, horror merchandise, and art designs because I can't make up my mind about anything.
Yes. Miss Claudia.
I am Claudia Blood. I am a science fiction and fantasy author, or science fantasy. I like that the best. And my book Lyra just came out on the 15th. And for some reason, I have one not near me. So we're going to move on.
And last but not least.
Greetings, fellow humans. It's been a hot minute since I've been on Go Indie Now. My name is JD Estrada. I'm a Puerto Rican indie author. I have multiple genres from middle grade fantasy, urban fantasy, nonfiction, poetry, horror, and a partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah. And I have to ask, before we dive into our topic, JD, explain your shirt. What is going on there?
Okay, my favorite movie is Big Trouble in Little China. And this is a mashup between Big Trouble in Little China and the Little Caesars logo. They did a great job. I compared the logo of Little Caesars to this shirt, and they did brilliant. That's my family. That's my favorite film. If you read me, I wear it on my sleeve and on my pages.
Nice. I like that. That's really cool. I saw that. I was like, all I could think was a crazy redneck because it has a knife and a gun.
Look, Jack Burton is kind of a crazy redneck. The thing is that he is based on the West Coast, if I'm not mistaken, or at least that's where his routes in the movie frequent.
Wow. All right, guys. I'm going to steer us on topic here, and let's talk about the elements of a story. What are the different elements of stories? Like, what do you guys feel are important and what's not important?
Sentences are key. You need sentences for a story. If you have that to start, you're off to a good start. Okay, joking aside, unique idea, and when I say unique idea, just something that really resonates with you. A lot of people, I think, focus on writing what's correct or writing correctly rather than writing something unique or memorable. And I think they're both important, but you should switch it around in terms of priority.
Yeah, consistency.
I'm actually going to...
It was good.
I was going to say consistency is a very important story element, because I mean, you have to be consistent with character. You have to be consistent with your plot lines. You can't have plot holes, those evil little things that sneak up on you. So I would say that's a very important story element, is consistency.
Good point. Adam?
Well, I was going to actually disagree with JD a little bit. It's not that you need to have a unique story idea, because a lot of the, let's face it, there are only so many story ideas, but you have to have a unique take on it. You have to come at it from a different angle. How many times has Romeo and Juliet been rewritten? The current trend to do a rewrite of a fairy tale or a myth. It happens all the time, but you got to put your own spin on it. So,
yeah,
I'll go with that.
And to add to that, you come in and the reader has expectations, and you want to meet those readers' expectations, right? You want to meet and exceed what they want. So if the author if they come in reading horror, you don't want to give them the nice fairy tale, nothing happens and there's low angst romance, right? Like, you want to meet that uniquely for what the reader expects.
That's a good point. Yeah. Like genre specific.
Deliver on the blurb. I think one of the worst reviews I've ever given is something that I read. I read the blurb and I was like, oh yeah, this sounds awesome. Something steampunk, something different, engineering, blah, blah, blah. And I got a little bit of that and a whole lot of their copper eyes locked. And it's like, oh,
How do you really feel?
No. How do I? That's how it's like double O bananas would go psycho, and I would just stab them with a banana.
Oh gosh! I mean, that's good for romance, though, right?
It's good for romance, but don't be a dick and don't sell me a hot dog and then give me tofu.
Yeah, I agree. I once got a book from a trad publisher, and it was sold as a YA author's first foray into adult fiction. I mean, not adult, but I mean more adult fiction. But when I read it, it was like, nope, she's still writing YA, because the entire book was YA, and it bored the crap out of me.
Man. David?
I think for me it'd be conflicts and stakes are what makes a story, and there doesn't have to be. Obviously, there's a sliding scale of like how much, how serious the conflict is and how big the stakes are. But there needs, even if it's like a cozy fantasy, there needs to be some kind of stakes that invests people and the characters are invested in the story, and then the reader's invested in the story, and then there's got to be some kind of conflict, because conflict drives story. At the end of the day, if there's no conflict, there's no story.
Yes, which a lot of y'all's books do that very well, I feel like. What would you say is the most important element when it comes to your genre that you write in?
Or genres.
Yeah, or genres, that's true, because several of us write in like many. But you can totally focus on one if you want to.
Murder. I mean, if you don't have a dead body in horror, you're just doing your job right. I'm just saying.
Yes. I mean, that's a good point. So
Yeah, I mean, for sci-fi, for hope punk, you have to have, you have to have some sort of crisis going on, but it has to be believable. It has to be something that can be overcome. It's and not utterly hopeless. Stay in the lanes of plausibility insofar as speculative fiction.
yeah, and I'll bring up I totally I know we all read JD's good point and some steak sauce too, and Joe's hopping in adding or several dead bodies. So yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you please. I always talk too much.
I was thinking surprise, like twist, right? Like you almost have to have that. So yes, they come in with expectations, but you got to play with them, right? Like you got to throw in the pangolin that comes rolling down the hill like Indiana Jones, after Indiana Jones, or is your book even worth it?
Yeah.
Okay, from the genres that I write, that I don't think any of you write, I will go for middle grade. For middle grade, you need something that makes you smile and is whimsical. It's not a must, but for me and for what I write, it is a must, because when I'm going down that path and dipping into that soul well, if I can write something that makes me smile while I'm writing it, I know that someone else is gonna smile.
Nice.
Yeah, so when I was writing this book, developing magic, and I was what I really wanted to do was I wanted to create an Elvish language, a mythology for England, and to develop an Elvish language, which then I created a history which turned into the Lord of the Rings. So that's a bit of a unique one. I wouldn't really do that again. It took a long time. It took me about 70 years to do it. But with the other books that I write, kind of fantasy ones, I was kind of trying to think what it would be like. Is it world building? Is that the most important thing, or is it this? But I think it's mostly just compelling characters, really. At the end of the day, as Adam said before, there is only so many stories that you can tell. The broad strokes of a story. There's only there's only so many different, and even if you've got a unique take on something, there's chances are someone else has that same unique take and has done that unique take somewhere as well. So I think what really kind of leaves you after the story is finished, the thing that you're left with is the characters and their stories and what they're like. So yeah, I think compelling characters is the thing that is the most important aspect.
How do you make
because you can forget about the plot of the book and remember the characters.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite characters in mysteries is John Dortmunder in Donald Westlake's books. Now the plots of the books are absolutely, they start off simple and they get ridiculous as things go awry, but Dortmunder is just such a memorable character. I remember him over the plots of the 13 or 14 books that he wrote in that series. So yes, David, absolutely get those memorable characters, and people are going to keep reading it.
I think you are trolling Joe now, David, with the Tolkien books. But I'm curious. This is going to go a little more in depth into the characters, and you guys know I love characters. # character driven. What makes a compelling character for the story?
Make them real. Don't make them two-dimensional. A lot of people, again, going back to my initial point, even though I can add the addendum from Adam, give it a unique spin. Make it base it, take elements from people that you know, and get to the point where you can have a proper conversation and do a in-depth interview with the character, and you know exactly why they say what they say when they say it.
And then put them in a situation that's appropriate for them, that actually challenges them and makes them even more themselves.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I've heard from voice actors that one of the key things that they have to do is that if you have to be able to do Macbeth in the voice of that character actor or the cartoon actor, so that you know that you've got it dialed in. And it's the same with writing. No matter what they say, it has to sound and feel like them, and to the point that they feel like someone that people can relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think flaws are an important thing. You know, making sure that they have flaws. And I think this is I still think that some people there's a minority of readers that don't really like characters that have the protagonists and heroes that have flaws still. But I think that's a very kind of certain type of reader and a certain type of genre. But I think, you know, as writing and storytelling has progressed, I think people find characters with flaws more relatable because it makes them feel better about themselves, and it makes people empathize with characters a little bit more when they feel real. And, you know, everyone has flaws. So I think with like protagonists and antagonists, you know, if you're giving them to make them compelling and to make them to be able to challenge them and everything, is if you give them realistic flaws that help build the character, that helps. And then with like kind of side characters and stuff, which you have to try and make memorable, which is different, because I think compelling is different to memorable, because you can have a character that is unlikable, but they're compelling and you want to know about them and you want to read about them and you want to know what happens to them, but you might not like them. And there's a few examples I can think of for that, like, you know, Bayaz from Joe Abercrombie's books, or you know Christian Grey, I suppose, from 50 Shades, of people like that kind of stuff. They're not a likable character, but people find him compelling. But with side characters, like, you kind of just want to make them memorable and stand out. So with that is when it's like kind of thinking of like, I have a character in one of my books who is a sailor, and he lives in a place which is hit by like torrential storms always. So everyone kind of wears these cloaks that are like waterproof that they don't only make in this town. But he walks around in just a vest all the time, and even when he's on his boat, he's just in a vest. And it's like, I think I write at one point that like the rain kind of just like moves away from him. Like he ignores the rain and the rain ignores him. It's like he doesn't even care about it. The elements don't matter to him. And that is just like something, it's like a thing that kind of stands out. And that was actually based on one of my friends who I grew up with, who used to wear shorts 365 days a year. And if there was a leap year, it would be 366 days. And it could be the middle of winter, and he would want to wear shorts. And now as an adult, he does. But when he was a kid, we used to walk to school together. So me and my mum would wait for him and his mum, because he lived around the corner. And this was obviously the days before mobile phones and everything, so he used to be waiting for them and not knowing if they were going to be late or early or whatever. But more often than not, especially if it was raining or in winter, they would be late, and they'd be walking up the lane, and he'd have this big red face on him with like, he'd still have the tears on his face. And his mum would be like, "I'm sorry, I tried to put pants on him today and he wasn't having any of it. He wanted to wear shorts." So this was like, so I wanted to make this character called Curran like kind of a bit memorable. So I was like, oh, I'm going to take this thing about my friend just wanting to wear shorts all the time. I just have it with him wearing a vest in this place that's like barraged by torrential rain all the time.
Everybody's got that friend who wears shorts all the time.
Yes.
We all do.
Yes. So any other thoughts on that? I know.
Well,
like,
your characters have to make mistakes. And when they do make mistakes, they need to be mistakes that make sense within the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you've got a character doing something out of character just to move the plot along, it's not going to work. So
true. I feel like that would create plot holes for sure.
And also make them relatable and understandable, but never predictable. I think everyone gets absolutely pissed off when you can guess absolutely every single detail of a story and everything that a character does. There's a lot of big Hollywood movies that they just don't put in the effort to make something that you go like, oh, that's believable. No, let's do it absolutely predictable. Let's do it in a way that people will know what they get, and they justify it that way. It's like, people know what they want, so we're gonna give them what they want. It's like, yeah, but you can surprise them too. Don't be a lazy ass.
Yeah. Adam, you had a thought?
Yeah, and when they make the mistakes, can't just be, oh, they know, we'll keep going. You know, they're able to learn from it, and feel if it's, they got to be able to feel that pain. Again, it makes them more relatable. Going back to David's point, I have an interview coming up with another author tomorrow on my website, and we were talking about the difference between the DCU and the MCU, and she came down with, DCU characters are inspirational, they're paragons, whereas MCU characters are relatable because they're flawed. And I think that explains why overall the MCU movies tend to pull in the crowds more than the DCU movies, because they are so relatable. Yes, we want Superman, we want to see Superman, but we can only take so much of that, before we go back to the flawed characters, the Tony Starks who make really terrible decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also explains why the Batman movies do well and the other ones don't.
Yeah, that does.
Because Batman's about as flawed a character as you can get.
Well, that's one thing, and the other thing is that at least the Batman movies, as I remember, don't have as much slow-mo as all the other DC movies. It's like 30% of Wonder Woman is in slow-mo, and it's like, dude, seriously, I got shit to do.
Well, that's the thing with DC versus Marvel. Oh, sorry. That's the thing with DC and Marvel in general, and Batman is kind of like the outlier in the DC one. There's like, DC characters are basically all gods, and that they're just like, literally larger than life, and they have all these powers, and they're, some of them are aliens, literally aliens, and all this. And whereas Batman is just a regular person who happens to be very, very rich. But then with the Marvel characters, like, you have some of them that are a little bit more like, extraordinary, but you have people like, Spider-Man, and you have like, Matt Murdock and all these other people that just like, they're just normal, essentially normal people in these kind of things. And they're a little bit more compelling than, especially on the screen when you've only got 2 hours to tell a story. Like, they're just a more compelling because they're more relatable than an alien who recharges from the power of the sun. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's harder to kind of get that across.
Well, and I will throw out one DC character who is Harley Quinn.
Oh.
And she is so flawed, but she is absolutely human. No superpowers, no magical abilities, just a screwed up person doing the best she can in a screwed up world.
That's a good point.
Like me.
And also someone who doesn't take a hint in terms of red flags and their partners. It's like, dude, stop going out with that guy.
Yes. Oh my He's God. Mr. J. I love him. Oh my gosh. So back to the story element. I'm going to get us off DC and MCU because we could all go off on that forever today. Do you feel like indie authors utilize different elements more so than traditional authors when creating stories?
I think working in advertising, for me, it's always a question of who was responsible for the end creative, the creatives, or was it the client that kind of molded it and pushed it in a direction? And I think the same thing happens in terms of traditional publishing. oh, you should change this plot point because this sells better than that. That's always my question in regards to some traditional books. Unless you achieve a level of fame where you can get away with anything that you want to do on the page, I always wonder how much it's skewed and edited so that it sells rather than it being the best possible book that it can be. It should always be for the best possible book that it can be. But some things just feel super trite and trivial and as if it's full on pandering.
I think it kind of depends on the author and the genre too. Because I mean, there are some traditionally published books that are absolutely fabulous stories and are masterpieces. And there are some
Mm-hmm.
indie books that are the same. And then there are some traditional books that are just crap that are thrown out to take advantage of a trend or something. And then there are some indie books that do the same thing, that try and chase the trends. So I mean, it really depends on the author and the way they're approaching the books, I think.
I think in terms of chasing the trend, there could be more since there's less layers in terms of getting a product out. I think a lot more indies can be trying to hop on a trend than in traditional. The thing is that when it comes to traditional, there's this wave of stuff that just comes in one go. Versus indie, it can trickle and it can be a bit slower.
What was that? I think with traditional compared to indie, I think there's a lot more. There's a lot of personal pressure when it comes to indie and self-published, because obviously it's more immediate for the people that are involved, right? You know, it's a lot of the time it's their money being put forward, and you know, especially if it's self-published, it's all completely the author's money that's put in for it for advertising and creating the thing and all that kind of stuff. With trad. Obviously it's a company's money, and there's an investment in there from the start when you get an advance or whatever like that, and then you're having these people creating these advertising campaigns and everything. So there needs to be that you need to be able to stand out a little bit more. Like I think with indie, there's a very kind of specific way where you can build a readership and you can build like kind of success with, like, you have like 20 books to Vegas method, or you have other ones where there's a few different ways that people can do it over time, or some people get very, very successful right out of the gate. With indie, with trad, sorry, you kind of have to have that immediate success either way when the first book comes out, especially if you're a debut author, and you get a lot of kind of people that are then cut aside if that doesn't happen. It's very much more cutthroat. So because of that, there needs to be more easily identifiable hooks or comps for traditional stuff than I think it is for indie. There's, it has to, people have to be able to see it and go, okay, yeah, I know what this is right away. And even then, if they get it and then start reading it and it's surprising in some ways, or there's a little bit more to what it actually is initially, that's great. But a lot of the time it has to be like, this is like this and this and this, and you know these things, you love these things. This is similar, or this is more of it, because if not, the next book down on the bestsellers list or whatever advertisement they've got in a newspaper or a magazine or a website is going to be the next thing that people are going to look at. So there's a lot more kind of, it's much more cutthroat, and so I can kind of see why there's like this kind of thing where it's like it seems like there's less risk taken sometimes, but I think sometimes the risk is hidden beneath the layers of like accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a lot more calculation of risk with traditional publishers and indie publishers. You look at what's out there for indies, and it's all over the map. You have things, and some of them are going to be hits with a tiny, tiny fraction of readers, and some are going to be broader. But an indie author can write whatever they want to write and put it out there for somebody who thinks like them. And if 50 people buy it, because there are 50 people who are, who match that particular Venn diagram, then it's a fantastic success. Whereas a traditional publisher is going to look at that and go, yeah, we can't even pay the coffee boy, on 50 books. So
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. And we've got Joe dropped a comment about our conversation earlier with the Marvel DC stuff. Marvel also made a decision with Iron Man to approach the cinematic universe with cinematic intent, whereas DC has constantly fluxed between being that popcorn folder cinema and serious and back again. And then Vanessa is joining us. She says, a little late, but I'm here. So, and then it was hard for fans to decide which they wanted with DC. And they're just chatting, saying hi. So, yeah. I know, traditional and indie, it's so crazy because they do kind of interchange. Like they're blending together, but at the same time, we're not blending together anymore. So
there's good and bad in both. And what I hate is that people think that if something's indie, it's going to have less of a chance to be memorable than if it's traditionally published. And if it's traditionally published, it has more validation. It's like, well, you were able to maneuver all the hoops, which there are a lot. Don't get me wrong, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be a good book by the end of it. A good book is going to be written by someone who knows what they're doing.
Agreed, because a lot of times indie books are better. So, yeah. Any final thoughts on that one question before we take a pause for the Indie Connection? All right, guys. Let's check out what Miss C.L. Cannon has for us this week.
Hey guys, C.L. Cannon here from Fiction Atlas Press, bringing you another Indie Connection. Today I'd like to tell you about some indie books that you might enjoy if you're a fan of Gilded by Marissa Meyer. The first book I have for you is called The Miller's Girl by Nina Claire. Once upon a time there was a foolish miller who claimed his daughter could spin straw into gold. All Adela wants is to keep her family together, keep a roof over her brothers' heads, put food on the table, and not draw attention to herself, for she's no time for suitors. But all that is shattered when she's dragged from the village by a greedy king in order to spin straw into gold, or die. Suddenly life has become very dangerous, and which impending fate is worse, execution, or a forced marriage to a mad old king? It will take faith, courage, and otherworldly help for Adela to outwit those who would destroy her and her loved ones. And a happy ending is something she can only hope for. The second book I have for you is called Goldheart by Kenley Davidson. Kidnapped, abandoned, and betrayed. At least no one's asking her to spin straw into gold. Elaine was happy with her quiet, simple life. But after the death of her parents, the disappearance of her fiancé, and a traumatic kidnapping, quiet and simple are out of the question. Her father left debts, and now his creditors mean to collect. Elaine's only asset is her brilliant artistic talent. But no genius could be equal to the impossible task demanded of her by the man with ultimate power over her future and all that she loves. Held captive by his secret obsession, Elaine discovers a fragile new love in the midst of darkness, and seeks out to prove that art can be a powerful weapon, even against tragedy and despair. The third book I have for you is called The Storyteller's Daughter by Victoria McCombs. His shadowed face lit by flames. Rumpelstiltskin is his name. For as long as anyone can remember, every child in Westfalen has been born with a gift, and these gifts defined them. Then Cosette is born, giftless. An attempt to hide her misfortune brings her before the king, who entraps her to use her as a pawn in his war. Caught in a lie, Cosette desperately searches for a power strong enough to free her. Intrigued by whispers of an old king and a dark curse, she calls upon Rumpelstiltskin and finds him trapped in a deeper magic than she bargained for. Now Cosette must fight to reclaim her freedom from the king and break Rumpel's curse. When time runs out, she'll lose more than her heart. She'll lose her life. And the last book I have for you is called Spin by Genevieve Rass. A necklace, a ring, a child. There is always a price one is willing to pay. Lila sees her impending death in the mountains of straw waiting to be spun into gold. Faced with the impossible, she makes the impossible decision to survive, no matter what the cost. A shadowy stranger sees an opportunity for vengeance. Born to a nightmarish destiny that crushed and embittered his faith in humanity, he devotes himself to dealing in dark desires and desperate souls, and Lila's is ripe for trade. When the stranger asks his price, Lila is bound by blood and magic to pay. His own heart was never supposed to be part of the deal. But when honor drives Lila to break their bargain, He ends up tangled in his own web of deceit and destruction in a desperate attempt to save her life. In the black of night, there are no fairy tales, only choices. One choice makes a queen. One choice consumes a soul. It's a roll of the dice in a game where love is everyone's undoing. Okay, that's all for me this week. I'll see you next week on the Indie Connection. Bye.
All right, guys, we have a question from someone in the chat. So let's bring it up. Joe dropped a question for us. Which act do you feel defines a good story the most?
For me, the third act, because if you see Saw, the film, Saw is not a good film at all. It has a lot of faults, but that last scene, that last act, it makes it super memorable. It takes a 2-star movie and with a 4-star ending, and it ends up being a 3-star movie. And I remember just seeing that and going like, wow. And I've had sometimes a so-so story get really good. The problem with that is that if it's so-so, how many people are going to DNF you? So you have to be very careful with that, because, and when you query something, if you don't grab people's attention by the first page, you're screwed.
Yeah, I'd say the third act too, because if you don't stick the landing, and even if you have 2 brilliant acts before that, if you don't stick the landing, people aren't going to like the book. They're going to feel cheated. They're going to feel disappointed, and that's not what you want readers to feel.
And that's part of the psychology, right? Haven't they done studies that the last thing that you have, like even on a vacation or whatever, like however you ended, that's your overall impression of what you've gotten. So it would make sense that the ending, the third act, or the end of the third act even more, is the most important.
I kind of think that I understand like the third act thing, but I kind of think the second act is what really kind of defines it, because especially when you're writing a story, I think openings are opening a story is, or starting a story is one of the easier parts. It's not, writing stuff isn't easy per se, but it's you've got that enthusiasm of I'm starting something new, and then when you get to the end and it's like I'm ending this thing finally, at last I'm here, and and like endings can be divisive, and they can be they can be hit and miss, and people will have their own kind of, especially if it's more of like a twisty kind of ending, people will have their own like notions of what's going to happen. So there's always going to be some element of, no matter what, your favorite ending to something might be someone else might hate it, and that's, you always have those kind of discussions with things. I think second acts are where are tricky, because you have to keep the story moving for a start, and you have to keep developing the characters, and you have to keep it all compelling and keep the reader reading, and there's a lot of spinning plates in those bits, and when you kind of take it even as one book, or if you take it as a series, that middle part of the series, it's a real kind of art to kind of keep people coming back when you're in that kind of second act. So I think a really good second act is a really good skill to have, to be able to pull it off, and it's also, we probably don't even realize it, but that is the thing that keeps us reading after we get past the opening and before we get to the end, and it's the rest of the book that keeps us going. And that's where a lot of people do stop reading, is around the 30% mark, because it's just not keeping them going anymore. So yeah, that's what I would think.
I think Terry Pratchett is a master of the second act, because most of his endings aren't, or at least for the 6 or 7 books that I've read, the endings aren't the most memorable part. There are so many. The thing is that he's always tackling every sentence as if his life depended on it. It's ridiculous how quotable Terry Pratchett is. If you have a highlighter, you're going to highlight half the book. It's crazy. And his second act is always super solid, always intriguing, always super solid. And the endings are kind of hit or miss. And he's like, I want to start the next project. Let me just finish that. And sometimes it feels that way. I've heard the same thing apparently happens with Stephen King, that the endings, he doesn't necessarily always stick.
Famously so, I think.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I think he's done pretty well. I think he's done pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make an argument honestly for any of the acts of a book, because if you don't have a good opening act, people aren't going to continue into the second or third act. If you don't hook them in, if you don't get them caring about the characters and the problems that are happening to them, they're gonna DNF it, and they're just gonna say, yeah, whatever, it wasn't very good. It didn't pull me in. You can also lose them in the second act. As you're developing things, as all the moving parts are happening, but they're not interacting with each other, as all the various bits of the plots are moving forward, but nothing's quite happening yet. And again, the point about the third act, you got to be able to stick the third act. By then people are invested in the book, but so they're probably going to finish it. But if they finish it with a sour taste, then they're not going to come back for the next book or another book that you wrote. So, I mean, I don't think there is a single act which you can say you have to nail this one and the other ones are less critical. You've got to work on all of it.
Don't be lazy anywhere.
Yes, exactly. You can't be lazy anywhere. You can have moments. You can have a chapter that drags and you can get away with it. But you can't have a huge section of the book that doesn't engage the reader and get away with it. So you've got to do the whole thing.
I think with endings, I always think about, there's two actually that I always think about, and they're both TV and they're both kind of beloved series in different genres, and that's Battlestar Galactica remake and The Sopranos. And Battlestar Galactica remake is really well thought of, and a lot of people don't like the ending to it, but people will go back and rewatch the entire thing quite a lot. It's a really well rewatched one, and people generally don't like the ending, but it doesn't stop people from going back to rewatching it. And the other thing is the Sopranos one, which I think is one of the best endings of TV. But I know a lot of people that don't like it because they don't like the ambiguity of it. And for me, it's quite clear, spoilers for the Sopranos, that Tony Soprano is killed at the end of it. And it's just the reason it cuts away is because they don't want you to see him being killed because you spent 7 years watching him. That's just it. It's just the finality of it. But a lot of people don't like it. But then the Sopranos is still regarded as one of the best TV shows of all time, and probably the thing that kind of kicked off the golden age of TV. But a lot of people don't like the ending, so it's one of those things where it's like you're along for the ride to a point, and I don't think it's about being lazy with a third act or being. Sometimes if you've got a vision of something, and it's how something is going to end, it's not going to match up with the reader's vision sometimes. And that's just the risk that you take with endings when you do. People aren't always going to like the ending that you do, and so you just got to hope that people like the rest of it, I suppose. But that is why when you do, like when you see reviews for like a series ending book or a TV show or a movie, they're usually more divisive than other ones, because it is that thing where it's like, look, this is the end, this is what's happened. You're either going to like it or not.
Yeah, but I would argue that there's a difference between a controversial ending and a bad ending. If you want to use a TV show example, How I Met Your Mother's ending was just bad because it totally ignored all the season and character development that went before it and just did whatever it wanted. That was what I mean about consistency. It did not take the consistency of the show into mind, and it just threw something into the viewers' faces that made absolutely no sense.
I would argue that the whole of How I Met Your Mother is terrible anyway. So.
Well, that's another argument in itself. But
we've got a couple comments over here. Joe was referring to something earlier about something on vacation, because as someone on your panel can attest to, there was a moment toward the end of the second act of a particular trip where I had a dinner that I will never forget. And Vanessa, I'd vote for the middle act too, because that's often the hardest and arguably most forgettable act of the story. Yes, Stephen King messes up endings almost as much as he doesn't, but the rest of the story is always so good. Joe, because he doesn't end where it's supposed to end. Okay, I'm getting off the soapbox and broken record player now. Vanessa, LOL sometimes, but sometimes it's just disappointing. It is a good example. The ending pretty much sucked. But man, the rest so good. Speaks to his strength characterization. And then The Sopranos suffered from a horrible second act, but the last season was one pretty good. I will never forget how Phil Lotaro dies. Oops, not sorry. Spoiler alert.
To take another TV show, it's just easier to visualize it because you have so many elements of what works and what doesn't work. But Twin Peaks, the first season is epic. And then the second season, it goes off the rails because they had so many issues that the main show writers just took off for the first half of the season. And it gets campy and stupid and silly, but still memorable and enjoyable because it's not like I stopped watching. And then for the last 4 episodes, they leave you on this crazy ass cliffhanger that it took, I think it was 25, in the story it's 25 years, but in real life, I think it was 27 years for them to do the third season. And the third season depends on who you ask. It's either hit or miss, or it's golden. I really enjoyed it because it was so weird. And obviously, if you're signing up for something for David Lynch, you have to have a very open mind of what's going to happen.
Twin Peaks was a funny one anyway, wasn't it? Because like that's the thing with it, is that it's like what, and Lost is another example of this. It's like, what are you watching it? What are you watching it for? You know, what part of the thing? Because there's so much in Twin Peaks. Like you have like the soap opera part of it, because it is very operatic in that way. You know, it is very kind of, even the first season is quite campy in places as well, but it has this mystery as well. And you get this thing where a lot of people, well, when they find out who killed Laura Palmer, that's when it loses steam. But that's what people were watching it for, that mystery, and a lot of people were watching it for the characters and for the weirdness of the place. And like Lost is an interesting example for me, because it was, I quite liked the Lost at the ending to Lost, and I know a lot of people don't. Some people like it, some people don't like it. But what I've always thought was interesting about it was that there was a real strong science fiction element to Lost, which came out quite a lot as it was going on. But there was also this thing of faith as well, and that was obviously encapsulated by a lot of the characters. You had people like Jack, who were very, very scientific, and you had people like John Locke, who were very faith driven. And when it went too far, maybe in some people's opinion, into faith, they would bring a very, very science fiction episode soon afterwards to kind of readdress that balance. So it kind of kept what people were watching there for it. But when it came to the ending, it came down on one side or the other, and it came down on the aspect of faith, which is always going to annoy the people that like the sci-fi elements of it. Which, you know, it's one of those things. It's like, do you leave it open-ended? They could have gone that direction, I suppose, and it may have been less satisfying in a way, because it's nice to get a definitive, well, this is the way that it is. And then it comes down to, well, what are you watching it for? What were the things that you enjoyed about this thing? And if you enjoyed the faith aspect of it, if it comes, then that's fine. But if you enjoyed the fact that it was like a big science fiction kind of like puzzle, and then at the end of it, like, well, you know, that's not what the show is about, really. It's going to be unsatisfying, and that's ultimately what happened.
Well, I think that brings an interesting point in regards to Lost. I think that last season they tried to answer way too many questions, and a lot of people weren't satisfied with half of the answers. They're like, that's what really happened? Oh, God. And it comes down to how much are you going to answer, how much are you going to let the lore take a life of its own. How much are you going to leave it in mystery? Because especially in horror, once you see the monster, oftentimes it's not as scary as what you had in your brain. So how much are you going to give people? How much are they? Is the reader or the viewer going to be invited to let their imagination run wild?
Yeah, giving answers is tricky. It's dangerous ground. It's a dangerous ground to give answers to things like, and that's I was remember writing my last book, which is the third in a series, and I was like, got to a point where I was like, well, I'm going to definitively answer one of the main mysteries of the series, and I wrote it, and I was like, this is what I've always had in mind for this, and then I wrote it, and then I was like, what are people going to think about this? They're either going to get to this point and go, great, or they're going to get to this point and go, no, I don't agree with this. This isn't for me. Because you're definitively answering something, and you know, people have their Star Wars is the thing that suffers the most from this for some reason, because Star Wars was never, like the original 3 movies, was never something that was about mysteries and answers. It was basically pulpy adventure. It's like, here's the bad guys, here's the good guys, have fun, right? And then all of a sudden, when J.J. Abrams came on board, it becomes mystery box. Yeah, it's like all these mysteries, and then because there was like 3 years between films, people are all online and like, here's my theories, and then the next movie comes along and that's not the case, and people hate it because they spent the last 3 years creating this headcanon. So whenever you do give an answer to something, you're going to lose someone along the way, I think.
And Joe brings us up another good question. I'm going to keep us moving forward here. This brings up another question for me. Do you think one of the key elements of a good story is knowing how to get out at the right moment or when to end it? And he says, okay, I got to drop out right now. David Green knows why. And yeah, okay, go ahead, Adam.
Absolutely. I mean, Douglas Adams is one of my favorite authors. I love Hitchhiker's Guide. I love the series. But he should have stopped with So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. The 5th book, Mostly Harmless, yes, it ties up some things, but it is objectively a terrible book. I read it when it came out, and last year I picked it up for the first time since it came out and read it again, and my opinion hadn't changed in the intervening 30 years. It's still terrible. He was tired of it. He wanted all of these characters and all of this that he had created to just go away. But he couldn't resist. He was pushed into it by the fans and his publisher saying, look, we need another book. And so he delivered another book. Never should have done it. Should have ended with the 4th one, because the 4th book really provides everything is tied up nicely, and it should have ended there. And going to TV series, if you want a perfect ending, MASH's last episode. That absolutely nailed it. You want to talk about, sticking the landing, Anita? MASH stuck that landing, and yeah, I still remember it. Yeah, the 5th book is a downer. Yeah, he was tired of the characters. He was tired of writing it.
I think with getting out and in the story, and another kind of like smaller aspect of that is knowing when to leave when the character's story is done within the story, and that's either leaving them behind, giving them an ending their arc, or definitively ending their arc and killing them. Because sometimes like the character's story is told, and you get a lot of things, and TV Supernatural's a really good example of this with Crowley's character. Like, they eventually killed him off, but they had him around for about 2 seasons too long, where like even the actor was like, in one of the season finales, they forgot I was in the scene. I had no lines. I'm just stood in the background of this scene, just like looking around the place. And it's like, you need to know when it's like time to move on, and all aspects of the story. And it's like, and even if like Robert Jordan's a good user of this. He might not have a story for it, or at some point. Sometimes he can't. Sometimes he has struggled with it, but earlier on in his books, he was very much like, right, I don't have a story for this character at the moment, but I do have something further down the line, so I'm just not going to write about them. They're just going to go away for a little while, instead of just keeping them around as like set dressing, essentially. So it's always, you have to give. Sometimes giving a character an ending, a memorable ending, is giving them more of a service than just letting them hang around the place and not contribute anymore.
That's a good point. So, anything else you guys want to add on that question? Or maybe just on elements of a story in general? Final thoughts.
You do have to know when to end a storyline, a plot arc, a character, kill him off. And sometimes killing off the character advances the plot, because, and sometimes you also have to know when to kill the character off to advance the plot, and not just kill the character off because you've lost ideas as well. Because, I mean, sometimes that can go badly as well, because then you just sort of get into the area of fridging, which you don't want to do either. So.
And death isn't always the end. I always think about Beneath the Planet of the Apes, how they wanted to top the shock ending of the first movie, the Planet of the Apes movie, and so we'll just blow up the planet and everyone's dead, like the planet's exploded. But they still made 4 sequels to it. They still found a way to make a sequel. So death isn't always the end of the story.
No, there are very many ways to resurrect characters.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back, you mentioned the reboot of Battlestar, David. When they killed off Starbuck, and then brought her back. Which then contributed to kind of the mysticism of the ending. And I'm going to disagree. I liked how they ended all of that. Because it did tie up a lot of the mystical side of things. And you're looking back, you can see that was kind of their plan all along. Maybe not that exact ending, but certainly something similar to it. But as Anita said, death is not permanent in fiction.
Right, because it's true. Because like with Battlestar, because there's 2 specific characters, like Starbuck, one of them, where she comes back and she actually says. At one point, someone says, "Are you an angel?" And she's like, "I'm not sure." And it's like, "Well, yeah, she is." And then, like with the first, I can't remember her name now, but the first Cylon, that one that Baltar keeps seeing, she flat out says in the first, "So I'm an angel," and he's like, "No, you're not." And she's like, "Okay," and it turns out that she is, right? And that was always the way. So it's there, and it's one of those things where again, like people that are invested in stuff do read a lot into it, and they kind of come up with their own logic and their own headcanons, and you have to run the risk of disappointing people sometimes. That's what the story is, unfortunately.
Well, in Dune, they just clone people. It's like, this was a really good character. What are we gonna do? Just clone him. You're good.
And if you're ever in doubt about how to bring a character back, you can always fall back on our friend J.J. Abrams with "Somehow Palpatine has returned." We'll leave it as that.
Yeah, well, I just wrote a return of one of my characters. He wasn't dead, but he was in cryostasis, and he goes, "I suppose you want to know how I came back from cryostasis." Then another character interrupts him, and it never gets explained.
Yeah. The characters just be like, "Not really."
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't know who you are.
But first.
All right, guys. Well, let's go around and tell everyone where they can find your work and share a book, I guess. Just tell them a little bit about what you write and where to find it. We're going to start with JD here and work our way back.
Greetings, fellow humans. If you're in need for some silly stuff and some loud stuff in the background, who's got their mic on and having like a cartoon fight? That's funny. I am also Double O Bananas. Look that up, #Double O Bananas. I am the author of 21 books that includes poetry, nonfiction, urban fantasy, middle grade fantasy, and horror. In March, I released 2 books. This is the nicest, kindest book I've ever written. Short stories, middle grade. They take place in the world of Dream, of Traem, which is the dream world, and Penumbra. Penumbra is Spanish horror short stories. If there's a character in any of these stories, they will not have a happy ending. If you want to find my books, they're on Amazon. I will be going wide later in the year, but if you want to buy my books physically, please go to tazasyportadas.com. That is tazasyportadas.com. That is a local bookshop from Puerto Rico. Very wonderful people. They have supported the indie community on the island for years. They are super great people. And if you're going to give anyone money, give them and me some money.
Yeah.
Nice. Hi, Claudia Blood. And with this backwards. So I've got the Renegades Rising series, and these are a bunch of prequels of the characters that are coming together. And I've got more on the way. And it's going to come together in Hostile Takeover. It's a science fantasy. I think it's pretty cool. It's going to be interesting, it all coming together. I'm at claudiablood.com. I am wide for most everything. So these ones are on Amazon now, and then they're going to go wide in the 90-day period.
Sweet.
There you go.
Hi, I'm AF Stewart, Anita Stewart. I write all things dark and stabby. You can find me at afstewart.ca. There's one of my books, Visions and Nightmares. This one is getting a sequel, Fairy Tales and Nightmares, coming out around October, so look for it. And I just released the second short story in the Hayward and Anderson series, Shadow in Scarlet.
Ooh.
Hi, I'm David Green. I write this one under my pen name, J.R.R. Tolkien. You can find this on Joe Crompton's bookshelf. Many versions of it are all there, lining it up. But for my other name, David Green, you can find me at davidgreenwriter.com. I have the Empire of Ruin series, which is epic fantasy. It's 3 books of 4 available at the moment. The 4th one is out in September. And I have the Helen Haven urban fantasy series as well, which is like Dresden, but with less misogyny.
Yes.
Nice.
And David also is going to be hosting Basking in the Evergreen coming up on Monday this week. If you guys want to join, this is an excellent show. And there's always some great topics that come up in this. So, yeah.
There is.
And guys, before I turn it over to Adam for our final 5 minutes, I just want to mention I'm Madilynn Dale. I am a multi-genre author, paranormal, fantasy, romance. I'm kind of venturing into a little bit of horror and high fantasy now. I have no idea how many books I've got out there. I know JD knew his number. I need to write that down and keep track of it, but I'm kind of scatterbrained. You guys can check out all of my work and everything at my website here, which I am off with my pointing skills. What is going on today? I've got a blog and a podcast with that I do regular updates on, and I'm going to be dropping new blog posts about homeschooling and educating kids coming soon. So, but without further ado, enough about me and my crazy world. Let's pull up Adam's new adventure into space for you guys. This book is part of the Cassidyverse, and I'm excited for it to come out. So I know he's excited that it's coming out. And yeah, check this out and let him share a little bit about himself and where to find this amazing book.
Thanks, Maddie. So, like most people here, I'm wide. I don't have. You can read all of the Cassidyverse pretty much wherever good books are sold. If you want to pick up the Cassidy Chronicles, which is the first book in the universe, it's kind of the origin story. Right now, it is absolutely free for you to download on Amazon. Go there, click on it, download it, enjoy it. You can find me at my website, CassidyChronicles.com. It's also, all of my links are in my link tree right down here, Gaffen 620. That takes you to the website. It takes you to free books. It takes you everywhere you will want to go in the Cassidyverse. And yes, I am now calling it the Cassidyverse because this will be the 9th book. It is another collection of short fiction because a lot of the stories in the first collection, which was Into the Black, kind of left a few questions unanswered. So I went back and answered some of those questions and then found myself raising more questions. It was a lot of fun to write. That's one of the nice things about being an indie author. I don't have to write anything I don't enjoy. And I'm in the process of getting it done as an audiobook. I found a wonderful narrator, actually referred to me by AC Adams, who I do editing for. And she's in the process of recording it. So I am going to share my screen so you can hear her reading a little bit of the first story, which is called Kendra and the Fae. It is a direct sequel to Magic for Skeptics, which was in Into the Black. And so let's see if I can get this to work. Boy, what do you know? All right. This is Onyx Vulcan reading Kendra and the Fae. Or possibly. I love technology. You
Yes.
can lose twice the information in half the time these days. It's a great time saver. Let's see if I can open it up again. Right. Okay.
Well,
Well, we're going to stop sharing that, and you're going to have to listen to my voice. And so I'll just read a page or two. So, Kendra Marissa Foster Briggs, what is on my windows? I groaned. Mama was in one of her moods, and I wasn't interested. I'm going to be late for school, I shouted back, grabbing a coat and making a dash for the back door. I hoped Mama wouldn't remember it was the winter break until I was gone. I'll be home late. I was out the door into the early morning darkness and starlight before she could protest and jumping into my ancient Tesla. It was nearly 70 years old, but still ran, and it was mine. It started immediately, and I was out. I knew I was delaying the inevitable, but when you're 16, a day's postponement was priceless. We'd done a respectable job of cleaning the house after the holiday party we'd thrown on Saturday, but Mama was particular about her standards. Ayana knew it, and she left me to catch whatever hell was going to head our way, which led to her escaping immediately after my folks got home Monday night. They'd been tired and headed right to bed. Now it was morning, and Mama was inspecting. Time to flee. As I drove through the frozen Northern Imperium landscape, I thought about the strange events of the weekend. Had we really been the focal point of Fae activity? I mean, Ayana's mom believed it, and after we swapped the holly for mistletoe as we should have had, the weirdness stopped. Or is there a logical explanation, as Ayana insisted? Oh, it was Fae. I nearly skidded off the road as my foot slammed on the brake. Time slowed as I wrestled the car to a halt. I didn't think about the source of the voice until after I'd stopped the car and dropped my head onto my hands, panting. Nice skills, it said. That jerked me upright, and I stared into the passenger seat. A girl was sitting there, about my age, maybe, though it was hard to tell. I saw her well enough in the dark, but she didn't seem to be entirely there, as if she wasn't wholly part of the world. I'm not. Stop it, I snapped. Sorry, your mind is pretty open to me. It's like trying not to look through a window. Who are you? What are you? I am Alice Atrisda of the summer branch of the Sealy Court. I am an elf. She said this with no inflection or emphasis whatsoever, as casually as if I'd been asked what grade I was in. Baloney! I snapped on the interior light. Alice was easier to see in the light, and she didn't look like an elf. Then again, what did an elf look like? She was thin, but not unhealthily so, no more athletic than skinny, and then I did a double take. I mentioned it was winter. I was cold, and I had on heavy winter clothes. Alice sat in the passenger seat in a purple dress which started below her shoulders and ended above her knees, flowing and graceful, but not at all warm enough for the season. Aren't you cold? I don't feel cold, she said simply. I believed her and took a closer look. Her hair was long, wispy, and so white as to be nearly translucent. Her features were fine etched, from her eyebrows to her cheekbones to her chin, as were her hands and fingers. But what were... You're a damn elf, I said, gesturing to her ears. They were pointed. I said as much. Her tone was patient and amused. So that is a little bit from Kendra and the Fae. That's in the Heart of Space, which will be releasing in June. If you want to catch up with me, next weekend I'm going to be a virtual guest at BaltCon 57. I'm looking forward to that, so drop in there. But as always, it's a good time to go indie now.